Alrighty. So. Okay. I think we're done. I think I did it. I think we're all set up and ready to roll. Hello, good evening. And how are you all? Who's here? Hertie, Ilva, Chris, Ronnie, Brandon. My goodness, lots of people. Carol, Wouter, Holger. So many of you here, and others presumably too shy to sign in. That's okay. There is no shame. There is no shame. Good evening, good morning, whatever it happens to be in your part of the world. Right now, it's a minute after 2 o'clock in the morning here in California. And I'm here and I'm going to do some reading. Hello, Mahmoud. Hello, Jeremy. And I am, what else am I going to do? I don't know. I'll figure it out as I go. But we're all still hanging in here. We're dealing with a lot of dear ones with health issues and stuff at the moment, not in our immediate household, but in terms of friends and family. That cough was not anything to worry about. That was just me. Anyway, so we've got a lot of that kind of stuff to worry about, but at the moment, we're not, any of us in the household, dealing with COVID or anything like that, so we're good. Obviously, the country and the world are in the good and capable hands of all of our good and capable leaders, he said with a straight face. So we hope for the best. Meanwhile, we hope for the best and we prepare for the worst, which is me. So I hope you're prepared, and I'm going to be, as I mentioned, reading. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about. Not really. I'm in the midst of actually working on 3 separate things all at the same time, all in much the same way. Namely, I'm in deep revision, as we would say, or rewrite, if we're not being quite so fancy, on 3 different projects, both the Navigator's Children, Brothers of the Wind, which is the short novel, and the Third Ordinary Farm book. And all of them, for a variety of reasons having to do with scheduling and things like that, are all at this kind of awkward between phase where I am essentially doing a rewrite on all of them at the same time while I'm waiting for whichever one breaks first and that I can then go ahead and finish. So while this is going on, I'm literally carrying all these different plot lines and story things, and I'm doing exactly that with the rewrites, which is that I'm taking things and I'm changing things, and therefore I'm then having to weave everything back together again so it all makes sense. I say this not to complain, because this is my job and I love my job, but my brain is just shot. It is like if you were to crack me open like an egg, you would find scrambled egg right now on the inside. So but not to worry. Anyway, so do especially want to, not that he's going to be watching at this time of the night, but I want to send out a special good wish to my dad, who has to go in and have surgery on Monday. And so thinking very good thoughts on his behalf. As I mentioned, we also have several other people that are near and dear to us who are fighting health issues. Seems to be a lot of that this year, unfortunately, between COVID and just life. So, but I think that's about it in terms of stuff. I mean, it's been a lot of friends and family stuff to deal with lately, and a lot of book stuff to deal with. And in the interim, just kind of treading water, but not in a bad way, I hasten to say. There's a lot of people out there who have things much worse than we do, and especially than I do, because I'm still able to do the thing that I like doing, which is my work. And I never really wanted to go out of the house much anyway. I'm getting more and more solitary as I get older. I'm like, I like to get out occasionally, but I'm not one of those people who's like, the bright lights, I need to hear the music playing. No, I'm more like, I'll be lying down if anybody wants me. Because that's where I do most of my work, to be honest with you, and always has been. I put in some earbuds and I put on something that will kill the background noise of a house full of people and animals, and I lie down and I play four-dimensional chess with plot lines and characters and things like that, and it's actually something that I enjoy. So as I said, I'm not really able to complain. Anyway, all of that said, and thank you for those who sent wishes from my dad. For those of you who are interested, we still have a long ways to go in the book. I'm still reading from The Heart of What Was Lost. As you can see by where the bookmark is, we're only about halfway through. So we're going to be doing this for at least a couple more weeks. Anything else that I wanted to discuss? No. I mean, we're just all living in this surrealist Disneyland. Except unlike Disneyland, there are no refunds if you are accosted by someone in a giant mouse suit and beaten to within a hair's breadth of your life. This is the real world, folks. This is not a themed public attraction. So stay safe, be good, enjoy yourselves as much as you can. And with that, I should mention my shirt tonight. This is a shirt that I received from the people at Pevnost. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. It was from when I was in the Czech Republic. They are a science fiction magazine. And what this says down at the bottom, and it's a very loose translation because I don't speak Czech, but it basically translates to something along the lines of, I like to eat while I read, or I like to read while I eat. So that's basically what that means. Anyway, so there now. Now you know, in case you see little bits stick up and go, what the hell is a Pevnost? It's Pevnost, at least I assume it is. And it means fortress. It means fortress or castle. So I assume that's why they chose it for the name of their fantasy and science fiction magazine. And anyway, they were some of the very, very nice people that I met when I was in the Czech Republic. What was it, 2 years ago now? It's hard to remember because everything is so confusing with all this, just like this what's a good word? This, not thesaurus, this just big break in everything. I mean, as we've talked about here a few times, who knew I would still be doing this while we're all still locked down when I started in March or April or whatever, and now it's October. But what the heck? That's what happened, and that's what I'm doing, and you're here with me, and we will continue. We will continue on. So, anyway, I assume by now most of you remember the basic plot. If you've just tuned in, The Heart of What Was Lost takes place between the last book of the first trilogy, which is called To Green Angel Tower, and the first book of the new Ostenard trilogy, which is called The Witchwood Crown. And in fact, it starts really just at the very end of the To Green Angel Tower, because the Norns, who have been trying to bring the Storm King back to life, have failed in their attempt to overthrow humanity and do all kinds of various wicked things. And so the Norns, otherwise known as the Hikedaya, who are sort of the dark fairies, I guess, although they're extremely pale, but they are dark-spirited fairies by the standards of the stories, are retreating to their mountain home of Nakiga. They're being pursued by a group of mortals led by Dukas Grimnir, who's one of the main characters in the first trilogy, and his buddy, I guess, or his assistant, Sludig. And we are also following two southern soldiers in their army who are kind of not quite certain how they wound up there. They were looking for a soldiering job, and now they're off chasing Norns across the north. Their names are Porto and Endry, and Endry has just been badly wounded by a Norn arrow. The other main plot lines are the High Magister of the Builders, or kind of the engineers of the Norn army, the putative bad guys, and Yarike and his protege Vieki, from whose viewpoint we are telling the Norn story. And then there are occasional summings up of what's happening, but from later on in an historical perspective by a woman named Lady Miga, who is a chronicler of the Norn. So we're hearing the official Norn sort of political version of what's going on as well. Anyway, so due to a number of breaks and some cleverness on their part, and the arrival of General Sunoku, a very, very strong, charismatic general, the Norns have escaped from another trap that the mortals have set for them, or essentially have had them pinned in, and they have made it back to Nakiga. And now the Norns are getting together to study what they can do, because the mortals are right behind them, and they know that Nakiga is going to be besieged. Nakiga is a giant mountain, and the Norn city is inside. So we are at a council, and General Sunoku, who is a bit of a maverick, has just made a suggestion that if they're going to survive not just this coming siege, but into the future, the Norns are going to have to start breeding with mortals, namely with their mortal slaves. And this has caused a lot of stress and fuss at the table of all of these Norn leaders as they're planning their defense. Anyway, so I'm just going to go back a little bit and start back a little bit. Anyway, all the nobles present had questions, although some of the remarks were closer to denunciations, and the argument quickly grew heated. It soon became clear that Marshal Muyare was not entirely in favor of such a scheme himself, but seemed resigned to his younger relative having her way. "If we arm them, then they will be fighting the mortals alongside the Order of Sacrifice," Muyare said. Oh, this is also about arming the slaves, because there are so few actual Norn soldiers compared to the number of non-combatants, including slaves, living in Nakiga. "If we arm them, then they will be fighting the mortals alongside the Order of Sacrifice," Muyare said. "They will be commanded by trained warriors of our order. It will be up to us to maintain discipline. And as General Sunoku says, we do not have the numbers otherwise to resist an invasion if the gates fall." The High Celebrant Zuniabi spread his hands in a gesture of frustration. I do not understand this. Like Lord Jikyo, I see only evil coming from such a wild, unprecedented action." "These are wild, unprecedented times," Sunoku responded. "And before you finish expressing your disgust with my plan, there is more. As I said, we must think not just for today, but for the future." Yarike, silent through most of the argument, now smiled. "It seems it is our day to entertain interesting ideas, General. Please do not stop now." She looked at him hard for a moment, as though trying to decide where the Magister of Builders stood in the pantheon of allies and enemies gathered around the great witchwood table. Very well. I suggest something that was mooted in the past, in the season when our queen sent the great nobles, Suteki and Omu and the others, to the aid of Inaluki, the king in Aswa, several great years ago. We must breed with the mortals. Her words fell into utter silence. Even Muyare looked ashamed, though he did not gainsay her, and Vieki could not help wondering what strange negotiations between the marshal and his younger relative had preceded the council. I cannot believe that I heard you correctly, General, said Zuniabi. Mortals? Breed with mortals? What? Blasphemy! Please, High Celebrant, do not confuse exigency with blasphemy. Sunoku had clearly come to the part of the gathering she had been anticipating since the start, and Vieki watched as she began to assert control, both over herself and the gathering, by sheer force of will. Again, he was astonished that such a prodigy should have appeared at such a time, as if war and chaos were indeed the foundry of change. As I said, this was spoken of before, in the days of High Celebrant Hiki, good Zuniyabi's predecessor. And roundly rejected, said Zuniyabi. The queen herself said it would not be. It could not be. Of course, our queen is always correct, said Sunoku. But I think that if she were awake now, she would see that what was bad then has become worse. Think, fellow nobles, think. Our numbers were already dwindling. Long ago we began using mortal slaves to oversee other mortal slaves, and low-caste Hikadaya to keep peace among their fellows, because we nobles were too few and our children born too infrequently. But the mortals, both inside and outside our mountain, breed swiftly. If we do not change, we will perish. If not by mortals storming our gates, then by rebellion here in Nakiga. All of us, your spouses and children and clansfolk too, will die in our beds, or be paraded like the scorned losers of the mortals' wars, before being torn to pieces by a baying mob. She leaned forward, and her voice became lower, less demanding. Think on what I say. Only 500 blooded, death-sung sacrifices remain. And after the siege, even if we survive it, how many will still live then? Half that number? Fewer? My lords, we feed more than 10,000 peasants and mortal slaves here in Nakiga. We of the ruling orders are already so few that after 2 costly, failed wars, if our underlings did not fear the mortals beyond our mountain more than their own rulers, we nobles would all be in terrible danger. Again, silence fell, although Vieki thought it felt like the agitated air just before a storm. But before Zuniyabi could walk out of the council, or someone else say something that would turn the talk from argument into deadly insult, Yarike let out a strange sound. A whistle. A snatch of melody that Vieki recognized as an old song from Tumatai called The Musician and the Soldier. The others in the room turned to him, as surprised as Vieki. Instead of explaining, Yarike continued the tune until he had finished the refrain, then said, I am curious, General Sunoku, how such matings would be regulated. Would all the noble houses descend to the streets and rot with the lower creatures, or would there be fairs or games of honor, so that we could choose the least disgusting? Sunoku did a poor job of hiding her irritation. Please, High Magister, give me credit for some sense. You know as well as I that many of our high nobility, male and female, already take mortals for lovers, and that sometimes children are born of these unions, however distasteful you find that fact. Yarike smiled again. I find nothing distasteful but death, General, and even that has begun to look more friendly in recent days. But the children of slaves have always been slaves. You would change that. Sunoku shook her head. Unusual and unprecedented as it may seem, I suggest that noble parents must adopt those children despite their Mongol blood. They will grow more swiftly than our own children, much more swiftly, as we know from watching the mortals increase through all the lands we once ruled. If these half-blood children are raised by the noble caste and schooled in the orders, who is to say that they will not be just as loyal subjects of the Queen as any others? You claim that I confused blasphemy with exigency, said High Celebrant Tsunayabe, sounding more astonished now than angry. But I think it is you who are confused, General. How can half-bloods feel what true Hikidaya feel? She shrugged, a very broad gesture for one of her caste and rank. Test them. Like all entrants into the orders, they will enter into Yadade's box. Nothing says we must take them all. In fact, the harder they must work to achieve what the trueborn receive as their due, I think that the more they will value it. And we will birth thousands of sacrifices for the Queen. Tell me what you think of this madness, Jikyo, Tsunayabe demanded. I am astonished beyond reply. What will Lord Akinabe make of it? Jikyo took a long time to speak. I do not know. My master is subtle, and there may be branches and twigs to this plan that I cannot see, although I am much of your mind, Tsunayabe. I could not make such a decision on my own. I will let you know his thought. Across the table, Sunoku made a gesture of patience agreed. It was as clear to Vieki as it was to the rest that even if the order of sacrifice and all the others present supported it, no such policy was possible without the agreement of Akinabe, the Lord of Song. One last question, said Yarike. Marshal Muyare, even if we all agree to consider such an unprecedented and perilous change of policy, many questions remain. What would we do with so many new Hikidaya? If we breed half-bloods anywhere near as fast as mortals breed more mortals, surely the time will come when our sacred mountain is too small to shelter us all. Muyare spread his hands. He still seemed reluctant to argue on his relative's behalf. Perhaps, but it would be good to have our order at strength again. Esteemed Magister Yarike, you forget something, said Sunoku. With the ranks of sacrifices replenished and our other orders strengthened, we could again turn our hearts to what we all desire, taking back the lands the mortals have stolen from us. Then we would have as much room as we need. Another war? Asked Yarike, but mildly. Our enemy's final destruction, said Sunoku, and for a moment Vieki saw the hard stone of which she was made, the unbending determination of her blood and upbringing. We cannot share this land with them. Surely we all agree on that. Eventually one of our races must perish. On my oath as a queen's sacrifice, I will make sure it is the mortals. Porto's father, dead these 9 years, had been a carpenter. Porto spent much of his childhood in the rocks, scrambling up and down ladders, fetching tools, and holding boards in place. So he volunteered to shore up the ranks of army carpenters in cutting and preparing a new pole to hold up the head of the great bear. The ram's iron head was immense, but Isgrimner's men had found an ancient grove of trees at one end of the abandoned city before the mountain, and some of the older trunks there were almost unbelievably large. The leader of the Duke's carpenters, a quiet but short-tempered man named Brynjar, chose a peppered birch over 60 cubits tall, a fit size to use for the battering ram's shaft. The wood was very hard, but Porto and a dozen other axe-wielders brought it down in less than a day and began to trim away the largest branches, while other workers chopped down smaller trees to make rollers, which would let the great ram smash against the gates at greater speed. Porto liked the work, but he had asked to join the carpenters in large part because he so badly needed to get away from Endry, at least for a short time. Since arriving at the mountain, he had spent much of every day taking care of the younger man, cleaning his wound, giving him water, and trying to keep him warm and fed. He had also listened and listened and listened, because despite his weakness, Endry almost never stopped talking. Half the time he was inaudible, his speech little more than a murmured sigh, but other times he wept with pain and begged his mother to come and take him home. After days of this, Porto was beginning to feel as though it might turn him mad. Before leaving to help the woodcutters and carpenters with the day's work, he had managed to get Endry to take a little broth from their thin morning stew, made from a few tiny potatoes and an even smaller handful of soft-footed mushrooms he had gathered. The boy had not only eaten some, but also managed to keep it down as well. That had heartened Porto, and as he wrapped Endry up in his own cloak, thinking that the active work in the ancient grove would be enough to keep himself warm, Porto promised the youth he would find something better for their pot that evening. But, as it turned out, by the time his work was finished, he had little strength left to hunt rabbits or squirrels, so he traded a tiny handful of potatoes to one of the other woodcutters for a bit of salt beef. It would take a while for the dried meat to soften and flavor the stew, Porto knew, but what else did he have here at the cold, gray end of the earth but time? Endry was asleep when Porto got back to the camp. He made no attempt to wake him, but added wood to the fire and put the dented pot on it to boil, which took much longer here than at home. He had chosen a spot separate from the rest of Duke Isgrimner's troops, so that Endry's moaning and mumbling would not keep the other soldiers awake, and now he scoured his tiny fiefdom in search of herbs for the pot. He found something that looked like white onion grass, and when he cautiously nibbled it, he found to his delight that it tasted like the stuff as well. He pulled up a large handful and returned. The pot was just beginning to bubble. "Ah, you'll like tonight's meal," he said as he squatted beside the fire. "Endry, are you awake yet? You won't taste a finer one even in the Duke's tent." Endry said nothing, so Porto leaned over and gave him a gentle shake. "Come on, lad. If you don't get up, you'll miss the feast." But something felt wrong, as though someone had stolen Endry away and replaced him with something solid and immobile. Porto turned the youth over. Endry's face was slack. His eyes were open, but already they had filmed over. He did not look peaceful, but he did not look pained either, and that was a small solace. He had been dead for hours. The meal forgotten and the water boiling away to nothing, Porto slumped down beside the body and wept until the wind made his cold, wet cheeks burn. He did not want to bury his friend in direct sight of the looming mountain, so he dragged the body to a clearing in a stand of young evergreens at the outer edge of the grove where he had been working. As the long northern twilight waned, he scraped and hacked at the hard ground with his axe until he had made a trench deep enough to keep Endry safe from scavengers. Porto reluctantly took back his cloak, but felt like a robber for doing it. So he made a bed of pine branches and then cut more branches to make a blanket to cover the body. He briefly considered taking the young man's prized harborside scarf to return it to the lad's mother, but in the end he could not do it. Never once had Endry taken it off, and his pride in his old cetro had been one of the most notable things about him. Buried in this bleak, foreign land without a tombstone, he could at least go into the next life with something he prized, something that had reminded him of his home. As it grew darker and the stars, like shy children, came out to watch him, Porto laid his friend in the grave and covered him over with fragrant pine boughs, then carefully filled the hole with earth. As he piled heavy stones on top to protect Endry's resting place, he could hear the other soldiers camped just a short way from him, their quiet conversations beyond his hearing, but their voices murmurous as a river. And he wondered in a strange, empty way, how many of them would also lie cold beneath these skies before all was done. At last, as night settled onto the north, he kneeled beside the mound and recited the few prayers he could remember. So began the siege of Nakiga. The mortals, in their thousands, swarmed across the plain at the mountain's foot, making their camp in the fallen houses of our ancestors, like snakes in an ancient wall, bringing their great ram and other engines to attack our city's gates. At first the queen's sacrifices and other orders were in disarray, but Marshal Muyare of the Iora clan and his descendant cousin, General Sunoku, took the remnants of the sacrifice army and began to train all Hikidaya, male and female, old and young, for a desperate defense of Nakiga. Nor were the other orders idle, and many deeds of unsung heroism were done by the builders of Lord Yarike to shore up the city's defenses, and by the harvesters of Lady Lukaya, who labored long and hard in the mountain's deep gardens to feed the people after a long era of war and its hardships. The celebrants and the echoes bound the other orders together in a web of shared thought. In the midst of all these measures, Akinabi, the Lord of Song, prepared his order for a great strike against the mortal enemy, to weaken their hearts and turn the taste of their presumed triumph to ashes in their mouths. At first, all that our people could do to fight the invaders was to attack them from above the gate, tunnels and emplacements dug in centuries past by the builders of old. Hikidaya struck from secret places along the mountainside, which had long fallen out of use and had to be cleared anew. From these hidden places, the finest archers of the Order of Sacrifice rained death on the Northmen, killing many more than they lost. Yarike's builders, working with the masters of both the singers and the caster engineers, created machines which could throw fire and flaming bolts down on the attackers from these high places, and at first these new engines found great success. 3 times did the Northmen try to bring their great ram to the mountain's gates, and 3 times were they driven back, their hoardings in flame, and many of the ram's wielders dead or terribly burned. But the Northmen were determined not to lose their chance to destroy the Hikidaya, and so they chose the best climbers from their ranks and set them to scale our great mountain and silence its defenders. Terrible battles took place along the steep mountain tracks, in its darker places, even before the steaming vents that gave forth from Nakiga's flaming heart. And though our sacrifices fought bravely, they were greatly outnumbered by the mortals, who could spend men like cheap coins. And at last the Northmen were able to bring their great war engine to the gates. Soon the Northmen had found nearly all of our tunnels along the mountainside, and many pitched battles were fought where the mountain's precious interior touched the outer air. Those passages that had been secret but now were found out, were quickly sealed by the queen's order of builders, sometimes even as those defending it still remained on the far side, so that the mortals could not come at Nakiga from those ways. Then the northerners, in turn, buried the outside of those passages beneath stone, so that we could not use them again, even if we chose. They began to find and destroy the few hidden passages still left to us, from which our sacrifices could harry the mortals. The ways into and out of the mountain, now nearly all made useless, the battle narrowed to the ground around the great gates themselves. The mortals' rebuilt ram was covered with plates of hammered black iron to repel arrows and spears, and its body was the trunk of a great birch tree, the oldest that had stood in the old city's sacred grove, which had once been our garden on this faulty earth, the hallowed spot where traitors and unruly slaves had been sacrificed at the turning of every great year, until the well of eternity was discovered in the depths of the mountain. The gates of Nakiga themselves had been set up days before the parting, even before the queen first came into possession of the city, and they were strongly built and full of old songs. Sorry, I misread that. The gates of Nakiga themselves had been set up before the days of the parting, even before the queen first came into possession of the city, and they were strongly built and full of old songs. Even the mortal's mighty ram, with its iron head in the shape of a savage bear, could not cast it down. But the Northmen had the scent of blood in their nostrils and would not turn away from their purpose. Hour after hour, day after day, the ram crashed against the gate's witchwood timbers, and each blow echoed through Nakiga's squares and across the houses of the city like the tread of some fearsome creature. It seemed that even the gate must fall at last if the Northmen could not be driven back. In that terrible hour, one of our nobles took it upon himself to save the city. General Nekaneo of Clan Shudra, the greatest warrior of his illustrious family, gathered 80 of brave sacrifices, each one a hero many times over in the wars of return, and after consulting with the celebrants and other lore masters, led his troop into perhaps the last passage still hidden from the mortals, a secret track through the roots of the mountain, untraveled since the days of Ur-Nakiga's first conquest by our people. We will never know what horrors they found there, or what terror they faced. But when the brave ones emerged once more into the light of day from a forgotten cavern at the mountain's base near the shores of Lake Rumia, their numbers had been almost halved, and many of those who remained bore dreadful wounds and burns. But with the hourly battering of the mighty gates bringing disaster even nearer, their leader would not give them rest. Nekaneo told his warriors, "We are already dead, and our ends sung. Let what we have already lost bring freedom to those we loved. For the queen and the garden, their heroic charge will be talked of as long as the Hikidayan live, and as long as our garden is remembered." Nekaneo led his survivors by cover of darkness around the mountain's foot, riding so fast that it is said their horses' hooves struck sparks from the stones in their path. They came upon the Northmen at the gate just before dawn. With surprise on their side, they slaughtered the sleeping mortals by the hundreds, and would have laid fire to the ram itself, had not the mortals' leader, Duke Isgrimner of Elvitsala, rallied his startled troops and led them in counterattack. The mortals swarmed like rats, and though Nekaneo fought his way through their unending numbers until he had almost reached the Northmen's leader, he fell at last, hacked and almost bloodless, a few scant steps from the mortal Duke. The rest of his brave sacrifices were soon surrounded and pulled down. So ended Nechaneo's ride, and it seemed at that moment that Nakiga's doom was sealed. When they heard of Nechaneo's fall, the people surrounded the council hall, crying out that all was lost and demanding that the sleeping queen be taken down into the mountain's depths so that at least the mother of all would be saved. But host General Sunoku, a great favorite of the people, stood on the steps of the hall and called them all cowards, shaming them and asking how Nakiga could fail when so many of them yet lived. "Are there no stones to be cast?" she demanded. "Are there no sticks to be sharpened into spears? No ancient witchwood blades of our ancestors hanging on walls to be taken down and given the chance once more to drink mortal blood? Have all the Hikedaya been destroyed already, leaving only ghosts who wail and lament?" When she had silenced them, Sunoku gave them heart again, saying that it was better to die standing than to kneel to a conqueror and still receive death, or worse, to be made a slave. She reminded them of great Hamako himself, who had walked all the way through Tso with a dozen fatal arrows in them. And she called out the names of her own ancestors, including Ekimeniso himself. "Do you think, when we meet someday in the garden, that I could face the shade of my great foreparent, our queen's consort, if I laid down my arms and let the mortals have their way? Do you think I could bear his gaze if I knew that I had let fear make me a weak thing? 800 seasons gone, I killed a mortal slave in combat to win my rank in the order of sacrifice. Why should I not rejoice to think that I may yet kill dozens more in defense of my homeland?" Their spirit restored by her words, the people dispersed back to their houses and living quarters, determined to fight to their last breath and last drop of blood. And some said that in that hour, Sunoku became as great a hero as her legendary foreparent, Ekimeniso of the Brooding Eye. From Lady Miga Saint Janata of the Order of Chroniclers. Okay, so hang on. I seem to have lost the video feed. Or we're pausing here for a moment. Camera, yes, it still should be using the camera. Hi, some of you out there, can you tell me if you can still see or hear anything? Because I don't care if I can see me, as long as you can see me. But and it hasn't ended the video, but it says, sorry, we're having trouble playing this video. So anybody out there who can drop me a comment and let me know? Okay, so apparently it seems to be working for you guys, so I will just continue. Anyway, so that was the end of the section from Lady Miga Saint Janata of the Order of Chroniclers. Erling Surefoot was a wiry, dark-bearded rimmersman with hands that looked too big for his arms. When Porto offered his services, the frowning man asked only 2 questions. "Can you climb?" "I was raised on housetops. My father was a carpenter." "Not quite the same, falling off a house and falling off a mountain. But we'll see. Can you follow orders?" "Yes, sir." Erling looked him up and down. "You're a bit tall for scrambling in some of the small spaces we have to use, but at least you're thin. 'Twill help." He narrowed his eyes. "You're not scared of these whiteskins, are you?" "No. I hate them." Endry's empty face still came to him every night in his dreams, his friend's ghost silent and sad. "I want to see them all dead." "You'll get no argument here." Erling finished sharpening his knife, wiped the whetstone on his breeks, and slid it into his pack.
Just remember they may look like dead ends, but they're as alive as you or me. Full of tricks, yes, but when you cut them, the same red blood comes out. When you kill them, they're as dead as any ordinary man.
Did you fight them? At the hay-holt?
Erling shook his head. Not me. I was here in the north, where we had battles of our own. When Scully Sharpnose fell in Hernestir, we marched on Kaldskripe to take it back for Dukas Grimner. The people opened the gates for us. They'd had enough of Sharpnose long before. But Scully's son, Geli, that scheming little coward, wouldn't surrender. He took his remaining men and climbed up to the top of St. Asla's church. Sealed the stairs of the tower with rubble, they did, and sat up there shooting arrows at any of the Duke's men who dared to show themselves in the center of town. Thane Unnar sent me and a number of my men up there. Well, I thought you said the stairway was blocked. We didn't take the stairs, you tall lummox. We climbed it the way we climbed the cliffs back home in Ostheim. Ropes, man, ropes. And if you don't know your knots, you'd better learn quick, because you don't want to be fumbling with an overhand bend while someone's trying to put an arrow in your eye.
He stared at Porto for another long moment, then reached into his pack and pulled out a looped coil of strong cord.
Here, see that man with half his beard burned off? No, don't ask him why, or he'll tell you the whole bloody boring story. That's old Draghi. Tell him I said he should show you how to tie an overhand bend and a few other useful things. And how to untie them, too, for that's sometimes just as important. Come back to me tomorrow evening and show me what you've learned.
What happened in the tower?
What's that? The tower of St. Asla's. You said you climbed it. Of course we bloody well climbed it.
Well, what happened?
Erling snorted. Put it this way. Being young Scully's son, young Geli may have had a beak on him like a bird, but he couldn't fly like one.
It was becoming very clear to Vieki that the informality he had enjoyed with Lord Yarike during their flight from the southern lands was now truly gone. He had to wait in the antechamber for his master's time just like any other high official of the Builder's Order. Vieki noticed other high officials looking at him more than they generally did, some curiously, some with scarcely hidden resentment. He wondered whether Yarike had already told some of them about his plan to make Vieki his successor. Whatever the case, the Magister seemed in no hurry to see him. Vieki spent a long time waiting in the antechamber. At last, the door to the inner sanctum swung open, and several figures emerged. General Sunoku was in the lead, her pale hair bound in tight military braids, her owl helmet under her arm. As she and the other sacrifices walked past, faces resolutely empty, she saw Vieki and slowed long enough to nod formally to him.
Try and talk some sense into your High Magister, she said quietly as she passed. And in that instant he suddenly perceived the force of her contained anger and had to resist the urge to step back as if from an open flame. Yarike sat behind the wide table in the middle of his sanctum, almost hidden behind mounds of maps and building plans. Vieki's first thought was that his master had aged tremendously in the last months. Yarike's back was as straight as ever, and the hands holding the documents were steady. But there was something in his eyes and face that Vieki had not seen before, a suggestion of weakness that he could not quite identify but could not ignore. Was it despair or something more complicated? The continual pounding of the Northmen at the gates had become a drumbeat of approaching doom, and the entire city seemed to shuffle to its rhythm. Only the rigorous training of their orders, or the active threat of overseers with whips, kept both the high and low castes at their work. "Come in, Vieki-tsa," Yarike said when he saw him. "Close the door. Have you been to the Singer's Order House?" "I have been there, yes, but that is all." I told my name and my commission to the speakstone in the courtyard, but they did not open the doors or even answer. Scorned and ignored, Vieki had felt like a mere messenger instead of a magister's heir. Yarike slowly shook his head. Lord Akinabi is determined to win the war by himself. But why, master? Why will he not work with you? Oh, he sends his minions when it is necessary. And it is not me he resists, but cooperation with the Order of Sacrifice. Yarike seemed to be doing Vieki the honor of speaking to him as an equal again, or nearly, and that eased the host foreman's mind. It is a bad time for rivalry, was all he said. The mortals are at our door. The queen is asleep, said the High Magister, shaking his head. He lifted an ornament from the table, the skull of a Witikoya, one of the long-toothed wolf-like creatures who had made the lands around Urnakiga their home before the Hikadaya came. Carvings all over the city portrayed the great hunts of yore, of Ekimeniso, and even Queen Utuku herself riding in pursuit of the deadly beasts, carrying no weapon but hunting spears. The queen is asleep, Yarike said, and the mortals, as you correctly observe, are at the door. Now is precisely the time for rivalry. When our revered Utuku is awake, all of the ambitious lords and ladies are bottled in a jar like flies, and can only buzz in circles, gaining small advantages here or there. No, now is the time for those who want to grab for power. Yarike laughed sourly. In fact, there may never be another chance like this, host foreman. They are playing for high stakes in the very shadow of destruction. I saw General Sunoku in the antechamber, Vieki said. She told me, try and talk sense into your master. If I may be so bold, High Magister, what did she mean? Yarike set down the long-toothed skull and flicked a bit of dust from its low crown. She wants my help to force Lord Akinabi into line, because I am one of the eldest of the Order Magisters, almost as august as Akinabi himself. He showed a wry smile that had little warmth. She thinks the Lord of Song unwilling to bend himself to the greater good. And is she right? Of course she is, as she defines it, but Akinabi has always considered the greater good to mean what is best for the Order of Song, and for himself. So there is nothing you can do. Oh, there are many things I may yet accomplish before I leave this world. Important things for the survival of our race, but these are not your concerns, Vieki-tsa. You will follow me to the Magister's chair, if I have my way. But you will not be me, nor should you. There may yet be some great calamity in my future, and I wish you to remain separate from me in the thoughts of those outside our order. We will have to stop meeting, at least in the open. Vieki felt something like a blow against his heart. Stop meeting? I have my reasons. Magister, surely nothing you could do. I have my reasons. Vieki had not heard his master's voice so stern and unyielding toward him since his earliest time in the order. His hands moved rapidly. I am admonished, followed by a second sign that meant silent as the stone. In a flat tone, Yarike said, and yet I can see you still have questions. It was true. Vieki's heart was full of pain that he had thought was hidden. He was unhappy to know he had revealed himself so easily. Yes, High Magister, I fear that I do. Why is Host Foreman Naji appointed to the greatest task? Yarike eyed him expressionally. What greatest task is that? The work around the mountain's gates, Magister. The work to improve our only protection against the Northmen. Vieki looked down at the stone flags instead of at his master and tried to find an appropriate composure. Ah, said Yarike after a long moment. I wondered what was troubling you. I could see it behind your movements. The High Magister pushed his chair back from the table and stood, showing his age in this deliberate way he did it. For a moment, Vieki spotted a bright flash of firelight at Yarike's throat, or so it seemed. Seeing the heart of what was lost again, even for a brief instant, made him think of the proud moment when Yarike had trusted him with the safety of his family treasure. But the news of Naji's appointment had made that triumph seem hollow. I will walk you to the door, the Magister said. Yes, it is time for you to go, host foreman. Learn to measure yourself. Excess of anything is hard to hide. Joy, anger, sorrow. And when you reveal yourself to your enemies as well as to your allies. Yes, Master, but I still do not fully understand. That may change. Vieki took a deep breath. I beg pardon, High Magister, but even if you cast me from the order, I cannot be silent. The work at the gates is by far the most important task we have. All our lives rest on it. Host Foreman Naji is not up to this challenge. He is a solid workman, but he has not the skill for such a task. The older man looked at him for a long time, long enough that Vieki could feel his own heart beat more swiftly at the length of his master's silence. It generally augured either fury or amusement, but little in between. I have met no finer builder's sensibility than yours in all my years in the order, Yarike finally said. Your grasp of figures and your imagination, which has startled even me, he broke off. But I must take more into account than simply skill, host foreman, or ambition. I must make the decisions I think best for all, and this is my decision. Do your work in the deep tunnels, and do it well. If you fear Naji's abilities are not sufficient, all the more reason for you to prepare a final refuge for our queen and people. Vieki did not speak until he felt himself in strict control once more. If that is your desire, High Magister, of course I will do as you wish. Learn to mask your feelings better, Vieki. Yarike came forward and took his arm as if in companionship, though it also might have been a sign of the Magister's weakness. In that at least you are definitely Naji's inferior. He is as stolid as the stones he piles. Do not let your emotions blow you like the wind, and do not brood. This is not your fault, but mine. I should not have told you so soon that I wanted you as my successor. You have changed your mind, then? Young fool, said Yarike. It was not necessary for anyone else to know it yet, and it has made you an object of interest. We must do our best to quell that interest. But if you have not informed the celebrants, how does anyone know? I saw how the others looked at me. Yarike ignored the question. From now on, you will come to me only when summoned, Vieki. You will confine your correspondence with me to the facts of your work in the deeps. You will answer all questions about your future role in this order with polite evasion. Do you understand? I do, but still his heart was beating wildly. His master seemed remote now. The days ahead will be difficult and dangerous, not just for the order of builders, but for all the Hikitaya. General Sunoku is on the rise. Akanabe will not give in, although he may make a show of doing so. The dance is barely begun, yet already disaster waits at every step, every turn. And if the mortals break down the gates, nothing else will matter anyway. We will disappear like one of those stars that lights the whole sky and then burns to a cinder and is forgotten. Now you are dismissed. As Vieki turned for the doorway, Yaarike reached out and touched his sleeve. One last thing. Startled by even such a small, informal contact, Vieki stopped short. Yes, master? I do not wish to interfere in the domain of your home, Vieki-za, but I strongly advise you to stop your wife from crowing to her relatives in the orders of sacrifice and song about your good fortune. No good will come of it. Is that clear? Something cold settled in the pit of his stomach. Kimabu, despite his warnings, had told her family. Yes, master. Very clear. The door swung shut. Vieki had just enough time as he turned to compose his face into a mask of perfect placidity before he walked out past the other supplicants gathered in the High Magister's antechamber. And that's where we're going to close for tonight. I'm glad you guys could all still see that. I just had picture disappear on my end and says, sorry, we're having trouble playing this video. So I couldn't tell if I was still going out or not. Anyway, that's all that matters, that apparently it was. So anyway, with that, I'm going to stop because it is already after 3 o'clock in the morning, my time. And so I need to go to bed. Excuse me. Sorry about that, because it has been another long day. Although, as always, it is a great pleasure to get to spend some time with all of you. And I do so much appreciate your joining me and spending time with me. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your family, loved ones, friends, neighbors, everybody you can help with. Even people that you don't know if they look like they need some help, because in tough times, a lot of people are too embarrassed to ask. And I will also wish all of you good health and continued well-being. And I will be reading again tonight, 7 p.m. my time, here on the Pacific Coast, on the Pacific Ocean, on the specific planet that we all inhabit together. Take good care of it while I'm sleeping, those of you who are now awake for the day, and I will see you very soon. And thank you so much again for joining me.